Hi, are you co-parenting with a toxic ex? Are you raising a teen or preteen and have to deal with a toxic ex at the same time? What if your child starts disrespecting you and you see and hear the attitude and the behavior of your ex as if your child is repeating that? Today, I will explain what can make it difficult for you to deal with the disrespectful behavior in a teenager when you're also dealing with a toxic ex. Why you should not blame yourself when for any triggered reactions. Because something actually happens psychologically in you that stops you from controlling those behaviors. And what might need healing if you continue to be severely triggered by your teen's disrespectful behavior. Look, when you put these two together, raising a child and dealing with a toxic co-parent, it's like you're in a double emotional bind because raising as a teenager with all the beauty of developmental stage is a major challenge, right? And on top of that, you have another challenge. It can be overwhelming and unmanageable at times, especially in those times when your teen starts disrespecting you. Maybe they say something rude or make dismissive comments. In my practice, I often work with clients who find themselves in this double bind. And I have recently worked with Mara. This is not her real name for confidentiality reasons. She's a single mom who is struggling to deal with her toxic ex and a child who imitates him. Mara's 12-year-old started to repeat things about Mara that her dad says, along the line like, "Oh, you're not very smart. What do you actually do for me?" What if your ex, just like Mara's, is in a better financial position and plays a friend with your child? They offer little discipline, lots of gifts, and very soft home rules. And you are the responsible parent, reinforcing discipline and structure, making sure that things get done, maybe getting your child to bed early, helping them to stick with the routine, and at the same time, you are working full time. Then you are perceived as strict and not fun. And when your teenager comes back from a weekend with the ex, it's like you are getting a different person. It's like they are a different person who needs reparenting and repair. Mara's daughter becomes very negative and judgmental of her after spending time with her dad. And what makes it so difficult to deal with your child's disrespectful behavior when you are co-parenting with a toxic ex? When Mara's daughter makes comments about her, they remind her of her ex. And Mara gets very upset to the point of experiencing emotional overwhelm. She gets very emotional and starts over-explaining her why she does what she does and yells. None of this helps to deal with rudeness, but leaves Mara with a feeling of guilt on top of everything else that she has to deal with. After the interaction with her daughter, she regrets reacting emotionally and even beats herself up. Now, when your child starts disrespecting you, just like the other parent, maybe they repeat the words, maybe you see the attitude and traits of the ex in your child's behavior, you're going to react emotionally. and it's very normal. You are triggered by their behavior, by your child's behavior, because those actions look, sound, and feel familiar. Psychologically, what you experience is like you are being thrown back into the nightmares of your past relationship. That's the time when you had to deal with your ex-partner and you had those emotional overwhelms. As a result, you go into a reactive cycle. All stresses are activated, and you might feel tension, familiar tension to your body, and activate a defense stress response. It feels like you were back in the past, even though mentally you know this is not your ex, but your body comes up with the same defense reaction and stress reaction, emotional reaction, and even thought reaction. Feelings that are triggered at that moment, initial feelings that are triggered in that moment, can be quite overwhelming and remind you of the past. Maybe it's anger, sense of helplessness, hopelessness, and you can get flooded by these heavy emotions triggered by disrespectful comments. Now, if this happens to you, it can be the sign that all stress and reaction patterns developed in the past relationship have not been dealt with or healed. Now, we really have time to process whatever we dealt with in the past relationships because we just get really busy with life. We have all these responsibilities and we have to keep pushing. And sometimes these old patterns of stress and reactions, emotional reactions, come up very powerfully when we interact with our children, and especially if a toxic co-parent is in the picture and they influence the children. Now, so this is the first level of stress that you might experience. Now, in addition to the all stress patterns, there can be that extra layer of stress that is connected to your role as a parent to this child. This is that extra emotional charge because you might feel a heavy sense of responsibility for your child's disrespectful behavior, as well as hurt, guilt, sense of unfairness, a sense of failure, and second guessing yourself as an effective parent. Now, so your body is a nervous system. They go into double overwhelm. You can say that, both with stress and emotions. Now, this brings me to my second point. And this is why you should not blame yourself for your triggered reactions and what actually happens psychologically when you are triggered. And we specifically are talking about this context of dealing with your teen's disrespectful behavior. So I mentioned double overwhelm that can happen in your system. Now, at that moment, your mind and the body go into reactive cycle, which is unconscious. We cannot control the unconscious. This is one thing we know about the unconscious. Your brain actually goes into a reactive cycle. You might experience one of trauma responses. You want to fight, flight, flee, or fawn. You can have the mixture of those or complex reaction. So when this happens, any kind of reactive behavior is automatic and unconscious. When this happens, it makes it very hard to the point of impossible for you to cope in better ways. So instead, you will cope in the in familiar ways on autopilot. Chances are that when you're in the reactive cycle, you will overlook new information. You will not see the situation for the way it is in the present. You will make inference and assumptions of bringing back the old information into the new situation because of the reactive cycle that's activated in your mind and body. So when you are in this reactive cycle, it's the behavioral thinking and feeling pattern. You assume that the things might be at their worst. And some people start catastrophizing in their head. Catastrophizing means thinking of the worst case scenario, even if this scenario is unconscious and blurry. And it's like the logic goes out of the window. I become all emotion. So your automatic reaction will take over. Like in Mara's case, she yells. Some people become silent. They can freeze, or they start over-explaining themselves. They get very hurt. Some people withdraw, fall into depression, feel despair, and hopelessness. These automatic triggered reactions is not something you can control in the moment when the reactive cycle started. It's really difficult to bring awareness into that moment because that moment is purely unconscious and might trigger the wounded parts of us. So we really respond from them as a defense for those vulnerable parts. A reactive cycle needs time to run, as it is activated by unconscious beliefs, feelings, emotions, physical reactions, something that hasn't been healed in us, and it comes up on the surface. So imagine you're dealing with this overwhelm, double overwhelm, your inner overwhelm that is unconscious. It's very hard to put a wedge into that. How can you deal with the situation in a calm, logical, and creative way? Chances are you can't, or it's very difficult, not because you don't want to or because you don't know how, but because you go into the reactive cycle. And the reactive cycles don't give us time. They're instant and awareness goes offline. That's why it's reaction. That's why it's unconscious. Think like the wave comes in. You're not going to fight the wave. You're going to ride with the wave. Yeah. It's not something you can stop. You cannot stop the wave. Think about, I cannot stop the reactive cycle. But it's something you can heal and learn more about. Now, what might need healing in you when you continue to be triggered by your teenager's disrespectful behavior? So I've mentioned reactive cycles that are triggered in you when you are confronted with disrespectful behavior from your teen that reminds you of your exes. So reactive cycles run on stress energy, stress patterns, beliefs, and emotional charges from beliefs. All of this is unconscious. If you find yourself constantly falling into reactive cycles and being triggered by your child's attitude, it makes sense to look into the origin of those reactions. Dismantle all beliefs and allow the stress patterns to leave. These stress cycles are unconscious, and it's very, very hard for us to consciously understand them. Look, being stuck in old patterns of behavior, emotion, and thinking stops us from finding peace and solutions to current problems. It makes it very difficult for us to see choices in a situation. It makes us very difficult to take in new information or to see the situation clearly. It really robs us of accessing that resourcefulness within ourselves and within our children to cope and to build better, healthier, and more enjoyable relationships with our children. So if you feel like it's not time for you to seek help healing those emotions, there are a couple of tips I will give you today that you can use today to deal with disrespectful behavior of your teenager that reminds you of the attitude and behavior of your ex, and start shifting towards healthier options. So when the reactive cycle starts, let it pass. Let the reactive cycle pass. Try not to judge yourself of how you handle the situation with your teenager. Let a little time pass after the situation and have a bit of an analysis of the interaction with your teenager and your own reaction in retrospect. So when you look at the situation after some time passes, think about some questions in your head. Try to be curious and try to stay open. Questions you can ask yourself. What triggered me? Is it something about my ex? What actually reminded me of the ex? Is it something I believe about myself? What are my biggest fears about this situation? Try to be honest with yourself and allow a little bit of self-reflection to come through. It's very important to take the judgment, self-judgment out of equation here. To allow yourself to have a bit of insight into your own triggers. Now, another good thing you can do is to analyze your values as a parent by asking yourself, what are my values as a mother or father? Try to finish this sentence. I am a parent who, and continue. Do it when you are not in the heat of the situation. It's very important. These exercises are good in retrospect. Here's an example of the values you can write down for yourself. I have it from some of my clients. I'm a mother who works hard. I'm a parent who values discipline. I'm a father who buys kids love with gifts. This is pretty honest, isn't it? I'm a mother who constantly learns about herself and wants to heal her own traumas. I'm a parent who values freedom and independence. Make a list of those values and be honest with yourself. Making a list like this can potentially help you bring awareness into any future triggering situations. Now, I hope this is helpful, but if you continue to be triggered by disrespect from your teenager, maybe it's time to look into those unconscious reactions and find the origin and the reason for those reactions to exist within you. Remember, a lot of things that exist there are for our own protection. And the wounded part of us are triggered when we powerfully react to our teens' disrespectful behavior, is because we have that first layer of emotional overwhelm that hasn't been dealt with or healed. Look, we all deserve the peace that comes from healing, self-understanding, and compassion. And the peace we find within when we connect to ourselves, when we dismantle some of those unconscious beliefs, when we allow ourselves to understand, to bring compassion and learning into our own inner experience, it all transfers back to our interactions with our children. So we are less triggered and more present.